Well, good evening to everybody. It is time to start our webinar about the use of scanners in pediatric dentistry. I honestly, a couple of years ago, maybe a little bit more, maybe 3 years ago, if somebody will look at me and say, "Hey, Juan, are you willing to provide a webinar in digital scanners in dentistry?" In pediatric dentistry, I probably will say, "No way." That's I don't see any reason why to use scanners in pediatric dentistry. So you probably will need to figure it out, a different speaker or, I so here we go. A few years later, I am here, October 13. It is about 7 p.m. my time, New York time. I'm in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I'm going to give you a webinar from my experience of using digital scanners in pediatric dentistry. It's hard to believe how we change, and it's okay. I think so. We always need to be open mind and understand that the technology is there. And yes, sometimes it takes a little bit longer to understand how I can use the technology in my field. But I think so. The take-home message, at least from my own experience, is to keep always your mind open and flexible, and in that way, when new technology arrives, you may not adopt the technology immediately, but at least you will keep the door open, which means that you will give the opportunity of, maybe after a few months, or maybe after you talk with a colleague, or after attending a webinar, you may will start to change your mind and say, okay, I want to do that. This is one of the most amazing webinars I ever prepared. Seriously, after being a pediatric dentist or a medicine and radiology and a lot of different things, this is something new for me. Um, and as I said, I never thought that I would be here giving you a webinar about the use of digital scanners in pediatric dentistry. The title of this webinar, I love it. Why scanning is now a must in pediatric dentistry, and I firmly believe that. I if this will be a live webinar and I will be walking around the room and looking at the attendees, looking at you, I probably will look at your eyes, and based on your eyes, I will know you are using scanners in your office or not. I guess in these days, maybe 30 to 35% of the pediatric dentists or family dentists who see kids, we are using scanners. I think so. The family dentists or the general dentists who provide care to children, they probably start to use the scanner, 20 years ago. Because as a family dentist, you probably will use the scanner for other reasons, and you just because you have it in the office and then you have a child, you just start to use the scanners. But we pediatric dentists, I think so it took for a while until we really start to look at the potential uses or indications of the use of the scanners in our specialty. So from the deepest part of my heart, thank you to everybody for again attending this webinar. We have a record attendance, and I'm sure after this webinar you are going to have some questions, and I will give you time for answering, if I know the answer, obviously, to some of your questions. I also need to just let you know that this webinar is a 10,000 view of the use of scanning or the use of scanners in pediatric dentistry. I intentionally I try to move away from a very technical webinar because I think so that will be the second step. I think so. This webinar tonight is just to discuss the potential use of scanners in pediatric dentistry, understand a little bit the technology, the pros and cons of the technology, and then it may be that will trigger inside you and say, well, I may well look at potential scanners in the market, and then you probably will really be ready to learn how to use it and a little bit more technical webinar. So just keep tuned because the idea is to have a second part of this webinar when I will provide a lot more technical tips about the use of scanners in pediatric dentistry. So that's me. That's an old picture. You can tell it's an old picture. But I am a faculty at Indiana University. And as I mentioned before, I am here in this webinar from Indianapolis, Indiana, and here is about 7:05 p.m. I always, if this is not the first time that you are attending a webinar with me, uh, if it's not the first time, you probably already recognize Dr. McDonald, which I always love to have him on my every single time that I'm presenting about radiology, oral medicine, or medically compromised patients, or scanners in dentistry. I always like to have Dr. McDonald because that's a recognition for somebody who really opened the door of pediatric dentistry for many of us. Not just only opened the door for us, but I always look my days when I was in dental school in the 90s. The textbook that I used in dental school when I was in third year, the textbook in pediatric dentistry was McDonald. And I really never connected McDonald. I knew McDonald was probably the author, but obviously, when I did pediatric dentistry at the University of Kentucky, I started to realize that Dr. McDonald was a faculty not too far from Lexington in Indianapolis, about 3 hours. And then when I moved here in 2014, I had the opportunity to see Dr. McDonald once, and that's it. He passed away in 2015. But Dr. McDonald put together the textbook that we have the honor and we have the responsibility to keep the tradition of McDonald and Avery dentistry for the child and adolescent. I mentioned this in my previous webinars, but I will say this again. There are not too many textbooks in pediatric dentistry, at least in the US. And obviously, we are not the only one. There are about two or three more textbooks, but definitely it makes me very happy when I travel to give lectures around the country. And then, at the end of the lecture, it's always somebody will come to talk to me and say, by the way, I use McDonald. And that really makes me very happy because that means that, in these days, books are still around. I know it's kind of weird, books, and I know some of you, BOOK, it's like, oh, what the heck? What is a book? But McDonald is still around. We are working in the 12th edition, which is coming with pretty much the same chapters, but we are really working in update the chapters. We are going to have a section in one of the chapters of digital dentistry and scanners in pediatric dentistry. We are going to have a new section in frenectomies. We are going to have a section. So we try to keep the textbook up to date in the knowledge. These are the goals. We are going to identify, well, I think so. I need to be careful with emerging technology because this is not really emerging technology. I will say emerging technology for pediatric dentistry. Understand how we can integrate this technology to enhance patient education, motivation, and then at the end, long-term oral health outcomes. We are going to recognize the business value of the technology. That's one of the main points of this webinar. If you are still undecided to buy a scanner, after this webinar, 100% you will need to buy one. There is no an option. You may need to start to save, or you may will talk with the dealer, with the seller, to try to cut a deal and see how you can finance. But the business value of the technology with the scanners is definitely concrete. There are technologies that they have a business value, but sometimes it's challenged to calculate the business value. But with the scanners and the ability to do scans and the ability of, take impressions, digital impressions in a pedo office, that translates in business value and how we increase patient case acceptance and revenue growth, and how that family, mom and dad who are next to you, in the operatory, when, the assistant of you are using the scanner, how that mom and dad will replicate that of, we go to see a pediatric dentist that is using the latest technology that replicates in that parents, in other parents who are, friends, or they go to the same school or whatever. So there is a concrete business value of this technology. And also we are going to discuss strategies to implement these solutions seamlessly into the clinical workflow. I have disclaimers, as you know, that's always important and fully transparent. There are a couple of clinical pictures, not too many clinical pictures. If it's a clinical picture, I am the author. If not, I will let you know it's coming from where. Patients and parents' consent will receive it. This seminar is supported, and I really want to thank you, Digital Doc. Digital Doc is the one who is allowing me to put this webinar together. and the ones who deal with Viva Learning. And so I really want to thank you, Digital Doc, to sponsor and to back up this webinar. And I also want to thank you, Ali Start, which is a company who one of the products that they have is scanners, because they also help me with some slides that I use for some slide decks that they have. And as always, if you want to have a copy of this presentation, you can see my email is in the bottom. Remember, I was not born in 1970. I was born in 1999. And so I'm, quite young. But what happened is when I tried to create my Yahoo account, 1999 was already taken by somebody, 1998, 1997, 1996, 1995. So I keep going down, 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 and I'm crossing fingers and say, oh my God, I'm going to end it up in 1950. But I'm glad stop at 1970. So when I enter JFYEPES 1970, nobody was using that name. So finally, so it's not really 1970, it's just that it was the only number available. And by the way, I can get your age based on your email. If you are AOL, you are in the 60s. If you are Yahoo, well, you are in the late 40s and early 50s. If you are Hotmail, you are in the 30s, 40s. So I can, Gmail, you are a young person. So this is the agenda. We are going to have an introduction to digital dentistry. We are going to talk about the intraoral scanners, how they work. And probably the centerpiece of this webinar is the relevance of digital scanning in pediatric dentistry. This is just an image of scan that, you can tell that a recent extraction and that patient will need space maintainer or whatever. Before, when I was not really into using the scanner in pediatric dentistry, I probably will ask myself why I need this nice. It's nice, this image, but why I need that? I don't need it. I can just continue taking my alginate and impressions. I don't need to invest the money because what is my return of that? I don't do inlays, I don't do onlays, I don't do full crowns, I don't do that. So for me, I don't place implants, I don't restore implants. So, as a pediatric dentist, I was thinking, well, we do space maintainers, yes, and habit appliances and early intervention appliances for ortho, but, I can just take an impression. So, it was hard for me to justify the investment. Now, in the technology, particularly in pediatric dentistry, you can place yourself in any place in this curve. This is the product adoption curve. My initial, you can tell I am a skeptic. That's, I know some of you may have been using, and you are, maybe a lot of you are pediatric dentists, and you have been using pediatric dentists since the first scanner came out of the market. So you may are an amazing tech enthusiast that as soon as the scanner, this big, that you will need to make a hole through one side in order to place that head inside the mouth of the patient. But you love the technology. You just jump and do that. I like technology, no question about that. I'm not against the technology, but sometimes it takes a little bit longer for me to really justify. And, that have been my pattern, in since I'm a pediatric dentist and even before when I was teaching radiology and oral medicine and other things. I look, I wait. Usually that waiting time is kind of waiting to see what happened. As you know, the technology changed almost day by day. So sometimes I'm afraid that if I'm going to get something in dentistry that seems to be very cool, that I will get that and then next day is gone or is something better. So I will start this race almost, every 6 months to try to keep updated. So it takes me a good amount of time before I decide, okay, I'm going to adopt the technology. But honestly, with the digital scanners in pediatric dentistry, and this is from my heart, my experience, I regret that. I regret to be a late adopter. I really regret that. I wish I just started sooner because now that I have, and I am a heavy user, I don't have any more alginate impressions, and I do a lot of things with my scanner. I regret that, I just using that, I couldn't use it for the last 4 or 5 years. And I will, have less vomit and more happy kids and more happy parents who will tell other parents how cool it is to come to see Dr. J Pediatric Dentistry, which is my practice. So what are the intraoral scanners? I think so we all know. It's a 3D digital impression of the teeth and oral tissues. The core components of the scanner is the software, and the processing unit. We are going to kind of dissect that with a little bit more detail in a few slides. The evolution of the scanning technology, the traditional impression, that's what I learned when I was in dental school. And so I learned to take impressions with alginate, with silicone and compound and a bunch of different things. But at that time, we didn't have any digital scanners. And I think so pediatric dentistry, we probably are the last group to join the group of users of scanners. And I know maybe some of you are super early tech but generally speaking, regardless with the scanners, I think so we pediatric dentists, we as a group, we probably were the last group to decide, okay, we may find a reason why to use scanners. This is the time development of the digital dentistry. The first computerized tomographic scanner, medical scanner, was in the 1970s. The first computer-controlled dental drill was developed in 1971. In the 1980s was the first CAD/CAM system. I never used that. In the 1980s, I started dental school in 1987. No, 1988. But still, the CAD/CAM technology was not really something that was adopted immediately by my dental school. The first 3D printer for dental use was in the 1990s. I remember, the 1990s was also kind of a milestone year because that's when CEREC came on board with means chairside economical restoration of aesthetic ceramics. The capability of, doing a digital impression and having the CEREC machine to mill the crown and in one appointment just, produce the crown and cement it. That was a lot of innovation because before that, we will take the impression and then we'll send the impression to the lab and we'll take 2 or 3 weeks or whatever until we get back the little box with the crown and then we cement it. In the 1990s, the CEREC really changed. But again, at that time, I was in medical school. And again, depending, some of you may start to use CEREC started when the system came in 1990s, but some of you may will take some time. And then digital dentistry continued to evolve very quickly since the 2000 to the present. I will tell you a little bit more about this. Don't take a nap. Don't take a nap in this webinar. I'm looking at you. And so I can tell you we have a sensor. If I see that you are closing your eyes, the system will let me know. You didn't know that Zoom will have that? Oh yeah. The Zoom will tell me exactly your name and will take a picture of you when you are starting to take a nap. So don't do it. So this is what we call the pre-digital era, the traditional methods. Before scanners was the pre-1980s. And that's exactly, my time. Impressions with alginate, silicone, polyether materials. The drawbacks of doing that, I love it. And, I adopted late scanners. So I still, a few years ago, I still thinking, this is the way to go. But we all know that alginate will have patient discomfort. If you don't pour that immediately, you can see some inaccuracy and deformation that happen. You need to be in dentistry. We all experience that. I know we took the impression, we put the impression over the sink, and then we forgot next day. Oh my God, I need to pour this impression. We pour the impression, and then the impression is like this, and because alginate will, be dry and even other materials that we have for definitely impressions, they will have some issues regardless with the timing. The patient discomfort with the pediatric patient is clearly, and I have been a pediatric dentist for 12 years. For 8 years, I use alginate, and I can tell you, every time that I will tell the assistant, okay, let's take an impression, and because we are going to fabricate a lower lingual holding arch or a Hyrax appliance and whatever, 9 out of 10 dental assistant will roll over the eyes and oh my Lord, taking an impression with alginate. Now the advantage to be the doctor of the office is I will run to my office and then I will, well, if the kid vomit, I'm not there. But still, inaccuracy and time consuming. It's time consuming. When you think about it, taking the impression, sending the impression to the lab, waiting, and we have diagnostics, we have the 2D X-rays and the physical models. So I was in love with alginate. I really, and that was my life, and that's what I use in the office. And one more issue is with the trays, cleaning the trays, sterilization of the trays, and making sure that you take the alginate and you immediately will need to pour it. If not, you will need to place some cotton with wet to avoid the desiccation of that material. So A lot of things in the pre-1980s. As I mentioned in the previous slide, a key milestone in digital dentistry was in 1985, the introduction of the CEREC by Dr. Werner Mornan and Marco Brandestini. They were the ones who created the chairside, or they came with the idea of the chairside economical restoration of aesthetic ceramics. It was the first in-office CAD/CAM system for chairside crowns, and it was an integrated intraoral scanner with a milling unit. So you can tell that, I am kind of giving a lecture about the scanners in pediatric dentistry, but the history of the scanners, it goes back to the 1980s, so 50 years ago or 40 years ago. The really impact of the CEREC was the beginning of the digital impressions. The technology used at that time was the optical scanning. The early versions of the CEREC were monochrome, only black and white, and the accuracy was a problem. At the beginning, we knew that, this new technology will not be able to replicate exactly what happened in the mouth. And so it was kind of a competition with the traditional impression materials that if you use the material correctly and you pour the impression on time, the precision of that impression will be pretty good, because that's what we used to do crowns. This is an article. I am the associate editor of JADA, and I always like to mention articles from JADA. And this is one of my favorites, which I knew about this article. It was published in 2006, but just to prepare this webinar, I said I'm going to read this again. This article was published by Dr. Werner Morman, one of the creators of the CEREC. And it is just amazing. And if you don't have anything to do next weekend or whatever, and you are alone, you already walk the dog, you clean the clothes, you did the laundry, well, I will invite you to look. It's available online. It's for free. And you can download the article. It's about 4 pages, but it's a beautiful historical perspective of the evolution of the CEREC from the beginning, the technology at the beginning, and what is the technology now. So in the 1990s, definitely it was a lot of that, Dr. Moraman and Dr. Brandestini. And they are next to, one of the improved CEREC systems, a lot better in these days than in that days. So in the 1990s, we have advancements in the intraoral scanners. We have increased resolution, better processing power. The first commercial intraoral scanners, or IOS, which one of the first ones was the CEREC 2. No surprise, the CEREC was the first one in 1985. The first introduction of a commercially available was in 1994. Now, some of the limitations: very bulky, big equipment, super challenge to use. Maybe that's the reason that I'm not an early adopter. Maybe I need to wait, because challenge and the learning curve was pretty steep, and you will get frustrated, unless you try and try and try and try. And it's still relative low accuracy. And I want to add one more. That was probably the main limitation: was expensive. This equipment was expensive. In the 2000s, we have the increase of the CAD/CAM and digital workflow, and we have the integration between the sensors and the scanners and the CAD/CAM labs. One of the first scanners to use 3D technology was the Lava COS in 2008 by 3M, which is the picture that you see there. It was the first scanner to use 3D video technology. Then slowly, it was an increased adoption in prosthodontics and implantology. I think so they were the first ones. The prosthodontics, the general dentists, and the implantology. They were the first one to jump into the technology for all the, positive things about using this digital when you are going to place an implant, when you are going to do a bunch of crowns. But still, we pediatric dentists, we kind of, we don't need that for us. Let's other colleagues spend the $40,000 or $35,000 or whatever. And then in the 2000s, the technology CAM-BEAM CT. I bought the first CAM-BEAM CT for the University of Kentucky. I was the director of oral and maxillofacial radiology, and I remember my first day as a faculty in 2004. One of the faculty members, an oral surgeon, he saw me in the elevator. He said, you are the new radiologist. And I said, yes, I'm the new radiologist. Well, I hope that you are going to get a CAM-BEAM CT. And I said, CAM-BEAM CT? What is that? And so the first CAM-BEAM CT came from UK, from the University of Kentucky in 2004. So CAM-BEAM CT emerged as a 3D radiographic imaging, and then enabling fully digital planning, especially in implant surgery. Now moving to these days, to our days, we have a smaller, faster wireless scanners in the market, a lot smaller, easy to place in the mouth. We also have the capability to do an integration between the scanner software with aligner system, for example, Invisalign or other align systems. So they work together. So the software will communicate with this aligner system software, and that will be a seamless, pretty easy integration between the digital impression and the aligner system that you use in your office. Also, in these days, 2025, we have improved artificial intelligence algorithms for margin detection. That was one of the complaints from the pros guys when they start to use the scanner. They say, well, we are going to have a problem because we don't see very well the finish line. But now the technology is much better to identify that. And then we had the boom. In 2015, we had the boom of usage of scanners. I mean, you go to a commercial exhibition in one of the biggest dental meetings in the country, and I guarantee that you are going to see 20 different companies who are representing 20 different scanners. They may, they scanners, but they may have slight differences between but scanners, was a boom. How about pediatric dentistry? Well, we start to realize we may can use it. So in the 2020s, we have artificial intelligence, which is amazing. We have clouds when we can storage information, and we have the full digital ecosystems. The ecosystems, I love that word. Some of the ecosystems are closed, some are open, and basically the ecosystems is the way that all these different technologies integrate with people, with the technology, with the different treatment options, and everything gets in one place. I need to say here that one of the things that always, and maybe that's one more reason why I'm a late adopter, is in terms of patient privacy protection. And that's something that we are going to touch base later. But I always, looking at these ecosystems when, all this data is stored in the cloud, it is super critical that this cloud, which is used by the lab who is going to fabricate the lower lingual holding arch for you, and this cloud who is used also by the patient, and this cloud who is used by, you know, the office, you need to make sure that this cloud is encrypted and have all the check guards for HIPAA complaint. We cannot, expose our patients, expose our uh, um, health protected information, and that's one of the reasons that yes, the technology explodes, but sometimes in the same way that the technology explodes, we need to make sure that the software and everything around this technology is HIPAA compliant. And again, it's encrypted and nobody can really go and open the ecosystem and start to download all the information, names and date of birth, which is one of the protected health information according to HIPAA. So that's something important of this ecosystem. But the ecosystem, what I love it, ecosystem. I mean, it's like it's in the cloud. I always look up and try to see the cloud, and then I don't see any cloud full of data, but is the multimodal access of multiple providers to that pile of information. So you do the scanner, it goes to the ecosystem, and then the company will take this and produce the digital models, and then the lab that you use to fabricate will access the ecosystem. So it's connected, integrated process of all this data obtained by the scanners. So that's the reason that you can see in this slide that you have a two in yellow kind of asterisk, because that's my HIPAA thing. I always kind of need to think about that because you really don't want to expose your practice. So the new scanners, they are wireless, ultra light with real-time feedback. They have full integration with treatment planning software, and they have enhanced patient engagement tools. That's what we call the patient chairside visualization. And that's a tool that you can show to the patient the mouth position, you can show to the patient the anterior open bite, and you can do that with the patient sitting in the chair. And that's what I do in my office. I play the computer, and then the patient will have the opportunity to. Sometimes it's difficult when you explain, even if you use the mirror, but now with the scanner, I love it because I can tell my mom, look, this side is in crossbite. I used to explain with me and tell, oh, this is the crossbite side, but now I do my scanner, and then in the chair side visualization system that I have with a big monitor, I can show the mom using the digital models. I can move it around and I can tell mom, this is the meaning of a crossbite and why we need to expand and why we need to put that up lines. That equals patient acceptance treatment. So these are the components. We have the handpiece, the light source, the camera or sensor, and we have the computer software interface, which is the one who is going to process and renders the digital model in real time. I want to thank you, Ali Star. They are the ones behind one of these products that they allow me to use this. And one more slide that I have. These are the hardware components of one of the hundreds of different scanners who are available in the market. But they all pretty much they have the same. They have the handpiece, they have the scanner tip. Usually, depending on the company, they come in different sizes. We like to work with the one who is the smaller because we work with kids, but the components are basically the same. Some will have a cable to connect to the back of the scanner, and that is plugged into the computer. But now with the technology, with the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and wireless, you don't need that cable to connect the scanner with your computer. So we are going to see a little bit more details about the scanning procedure, but I just decided that just want to have in one slide before we go. It's important to have the teeth dry because we are going to learn in a few minutes what can interfere with the quality of the image and the scanner or the scanning image. And one of the things that can interfere is the presence of saliva. So it's important to suction to dry the teeth. Lips very retracted. So in my office we use a lip retractor. Then the light projections, they have different, the core functionality of the scanners is basically three different systems. And I have a slide that I will explain briefly each of the system and which systems belong to what of the core functionality systems. Then the image is capture and it's a real-time processing. Thank you to the software, which is in the computer. And then you look at the image. And then if you need to, in the old days, we will say, with the alginate, if we know after putting the model, if we see that we couldn't capture one side, oh my lord, again we need to take the impression with the alginate. With the scanner it's a lot easier because the area that you are missing can be re-scanned immediately. And so as soon as you look at the computer, you look at the screen and you see that some areas didn't scan very well, just go back to the mouth and re-scan those areas. Plus you can export the file in different formats. As I mentioned, I will have a second webinar in date to be announced, but in that webinar, I will have a few videos that I create about the procedure overview, how to use the scanner, what is the best technique to use the scanner. But I just, again, for Ali Star, I just decided to take a couple of slides just to show you that, there is a learning curve about the use of scanners. Remember, we are working with kids, and so, not just only you need to introduce the scanner using tell, show, do, and using words who, you may not need to say a scanner. You probably will say, we have a camera who is going to take a picture of your teeth, and because definitely saliva movement, they can interfere with the quality of the image. So this is kind of a sequence. I don't want to go into the whole sequence until I have the opportunity to have the webinar about the technique, but there are hundreds, if not thousands of videos in YouTube, because the learning curve is important. Your assistant need to learn this, and it's not in a second. So they need to practice, particularly, as I said, with the patient, which is a child. So usually you start with the posterior occlusal of the molars, and you look for the maximum reference points, and then you move smoothly across the arch, concentrating in the working areas and full scan. And then you try to maintain an angle of 45 degrees to the occlusal plane for buccal and lingual scans. And then you use a wrist rotation to capture difficult angles and contacts. And then you will see what are you doing on the screen. So you can concentrate in the image that you are creating on the screen and see if you need to maybe re-scan some areas. I mentioned that there are three different technologies in the scanners that, depending of the brand that you use, we have the structured light scanning, we have the confocal microscopy, and we have the laser triangulation. This is now an optics physics webinar. In the next slide, I will provide a little bit more details about each of these techniques, but you can delete that from your brain. Each technique will have the pros and cons, and I think so. That's like any other technology. Some companies decide to adopt technology A because some reasons, and some companies decide to adopt technology B because other reasons. So the triangulation, or let's start with the number 3, with the structured light scanning. I know it's amazing. 15, 16, maybe more than that years ago when I was at the University of Kentucky as a director of radiology, I, did some small research projects with faculty in the physicist department who was working with the structure light scanning, which projects a known light pattern, which is usually a grid or a strips into the teeth, and the distortion of the pattern is captured by the sensors, and that is what is going to form the 3D shape. So it's kind of a grip, grid or stripes, and then the distortion of that stripes captured by this sensor is going to reconstruct the 3D. It is high speed and is very accurate, and is used for some of the available scanners that we have in the market. The next one is the confocal microscopy, which is also active wavefront sampling. This one captures images at different depths using a moving lens of focus shift. Only in focus light is collected to create a sharp 3D model. And this technology is probably the best for capturing fine details and shiny surfaces, and is used for some of the scanners that we are going to discuss in a few minutes. And finally, we have the triangulation technique, also laser or white light. Is project a light into a surface of the teeth, and then measures the angle between the light source and the sensors, and that computes surface geometry using triangulation math and create the 3D. So that's it. You can delete everything from your brain. You really don't need to remember this, but these are the three different systems who are the core of the available scanners. And then the output of a digital scan is a 3D mesh model, which is composed by thousands of points. And then that is put it together in a high resolution surface texture. And then the color capture helps to identify soft tissue or restoration, that the color is added by the software. And that can be integrated, as I mentioned, with the CAMBIM CT for full 3D planning. And then visual, you see that on the screen, is a dental scan model with a mesh visible. You have real-time features. There is a live in the way that you are scanning. You have a live indication of missed areas. You do your bi-registration and the occlusion mapping with the scanner. You have a color code quality map who will tell you in the image which areas are high quality, enough points, and areas you may need to re-scan it. And then the systems, pretty much all the systems will alert you for soft tissue interference or patient movement. So now let's move into pediatric dentistry and in more detail about pediatric dentistry. And here in this particular section of this webinar, I'm going to talk about my own experience using one of the scanners who is available in the market, which is I will show you, so you will see that. So these are commonly used scanners in pediatric dentistry. We have the Trios, the iTero, the Medit i700, the Carestream CS 360 or 3600. And then most recently, we have available in the market the Sense or the Sensa scanner, which is the one that I am using. So these are, you can tell that they look similar. Why these are, easy to use in pediatric dentistry? Because they are small. And I want to say that, this is not exclusive. I'm sure there are 100 more, but I just decided just to give you kind of an idea of if you are looking for a scanner or you want to move to buy a scanner, one of the considerations that you need to look is a small head, because we work with patients with a small mouth. So you need to pay attention to that. This article is super interesting. It was published in 2023 in Frontiers. It's a systematic review by a group of pediatric dentists from Argentina, Spain, and I believe Dominican Republic, whatever. But I love the name. Intraoral scanners in children, evaluation of the patient perception, reliability, reproducibility, and chairside time, a systematic review. So I decided to bring this article because it's very appropriate for what we are doing here. And the conclusion, I just copy and paste on the left side of the slide. It's just a copy and paste of the article. Conclusion, the use of intraoral scanners in children is a favorable option, finding a significantly higher patient perception and comfort with intraoral scanners compared to the conventional impression method. I mean, if somebody asks you, what do you prefer, an alginate impression or a scanner impression? I mean, it's no brain. Seriously, no brain. I can imagine, oh, I love alginate going into my trachea. Oh, I mean, it's no brain. You will say, of course, I prefer the digital. It took me for a while to understand that. It took me, I don't know, Brett, my friend, if he's listening to this webinar, you know, it took me for a while. You keep telling me, Juan, you need to have a scanner. I said, no, I don't need a scanners. I don't need that. I can continue taking my impression with the alginate. So the evidence of reliability or reproducibility is not strong to date. However, the differences between the intraoral measurements and the digital models will be clinically acceptable. So there are some differences, but these differences are not going to interfere with the clinical task that you have and the reason why you did the scanner. So these are the clinical advantage of scanners in pediatric dentistry. No a surprise. Patient comfort is my number one. No gag reflex, no impression trays. You don't need to clean. You don't need to sterilize the impression trays. So in the front, you may have an investment, but long term, you may well save some paper towels of the vomit, or you may well save some, the trays and the autoclave. It's definitely less anxiety for children. I experienced that firsthand, 100%, 100%. I mean, there is no, I remember not too long ago, okay, we are going to take an impression. It's like a Play-Doh that, is initially is soft and then will get hard. And that seconds with the hands in the mouth of the patient pushing the tray. I mean, even if it's, I don't know, 20 seconds, in reality, it was like a 3 hours. And praying to God or, to somebody, please don't vomit. Look down, move your legs. Sometimes even with nitros, because as you know, the nitros will decrease the gag reflex. So all different strategies take an impression. I know the majority of the patient may well work, but that, 5%, 10% will be miserable. Miserable. When I knew that it was a patient difficult with an impression with alginate, I will run to my office, close the door because I didn't really want to hear the blah, and I don't want that. Or when the assistant will come to my office and say, Dr. J, I couldn't take it. Why you don't take it? I say, oh, no, 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 no. Let's don't do the space maintainer. I know, not the majority, but once more than once a while that will happen. So less anxiety and better experience for children with special needs. Special needs is a big one, big one, big one. With patient of special needs, taking an alginate impression is extraordinary challenge. There is more speed and efficiency, faster procedures, shorter appointments. And shorter appointment means that can see maybe one or two more patients in the day. That's returning of the investment, that you have the ability to see more patients. You have an immediate data capture, and this is a much better patient flow in your clinics. Enhanced accuracy is elimination of distortion from the materials. I remember the days of using alginate. Some of my assistants will not follow the proportion between the powder and the liquid, and then the alginate will be a soup, literally a soup. And then as soon as you put that in the mouth, will go everywhere. And then you don't know if the impression will be okay. This happened to me many times. I'm sure it happens to you. You look at the impression, you know that it's not the ideal impression. You don't want to torture the patient again taking a new impression. So you just give up and say, okay, send it to the lab. And then when they send the appliance, even as simple as a lower lingual holding arch, doesn't fit. Or they send the banana loop, doesn't fit. And then oh my God, I need to do it again. So, and definitely it's better fit for the appliance. So accuracy reflects how close a measurement is to the true value, and precision reflects the consistency of the measurements. The average accuracy of the scanners average is around 20 micros, and the precision is something in between 0.015% to 0.24%. So I think so these days nobody argue about the precision of and the accuracy of the scan image obtained by a digital scanner. What is the factors influencing the accuracy? The scanner technology. As we know, different models and generation of scanners have different levels of accuracy. The scan size, the full arch are more prone to large errors than just doing one side or just doing, the lower left, just put a banana loop. And definitely the intraoral environment, the saliva is one of our enemies. Ideally, you need to scan them out with drying first, using a lip retractor. Movement of the patient, that could be a potential issue, especially again, I need to remind you and me that we work with kids, and then clinical conditions. There are 100, plenty of articles, and I just decided to place a couple of articles here, but I probably can fill, I don't know, 10 hours of lecture, because definitely um, the um, the literature about the reproducibility, the accuracy of intraoral scanners is very robust, and in this day they all pretty much agree that it's highly accurate. So the digital files can be stored indefinitely. I remember in the old days, I have one here, the boxes with the models, and then putting that in the office. And again, you can store the digital files in the cloud, but again, you need to be careful about the security of the cloud that you are using to storage that. You need to be careful not to, again, use cloud places that they don't have all the security issues, and then you can expose that, and you don't want that. It's super easy to share with labs and specialists. So I particularly work with one lab that we have a very easy integration between the image that I obtain with the digital scanner, and the lab is transferred automatically. So the lab will receive the data and will create or fabricate my appliance, and then it will take only a few days until I have the appliance in my office. In the old days, I will send the impression, will take forever. Who knows that impression full of cotton rolls with, I mean, in these days is different. Probably one of the major good points about the scanners and pediatric dentistry is the parent communication and education. This is my return of investment. I obviously I talk about brushing and diet and all the things that we pediatric dentists we do with our patients. I do that, but also when I need to take an impression using my digital scanner, I also explain to the parents that that we have a new technology, that we are not using the Play-Doh, and they will say, "Wow, yeah, my dentist is using that," because general dentists they have been using this technology a lot longer than us. So for the parents, it's easy to connect the technology with what they are the dentist is using in the parents' mouth. They love it. So also, I can explain much better to the parents if a patient is having a crossbite, or if the patient is having an anterior crossbite or a habit and an open bite. I can explain that a million times easier than the parents getting, to the patient mouth and everybody trying to look at that. I mean, this is this is marketing. This is really, it's technology to help to show that you do, you take best care of your patient, you do the best that you can for your patient, but you also are using technology who help you to do that. Um, I That's me in my office, and this, you can tell this is a scanner for one of my patients with open bite. I mean, I can easily explain to the parents, look at the open bite. That's the hole when your son or your daughter was placing the finger. And you can tell that girl. I asked mom, can I put the picture in a presentation? Of course, Dr. Joe, you can do that. So they signed that. But I love it because that girl is basically, I told her, show the popsicle and the scanner. So she was there. It's also used for early ortho assessment. We can use scanners for monitoring mixed dentition, crane spacing, eruption sequence. And also, there are some software available that orthodontists that you work, they can simulate tooth movement, and they can show the parents and they can show the patient the case or the treatment finish even without start the treatment. For fabrication of appliances is my number one. This is my main. This is I'm a pediatric dentist, and this is what I'm doing now. I love it. For space maintainers, for habit breakers and functional appliances, that's what I'm doing. You can see that two images are the one on the top is a photograph, and the one in the bottom is the scanner, the digital scanner of that photograph of that patient, and the accuracy is just amazing. And I can put that on the screen and I can show that to the parents. I can do a lower lingual holding arch. I can scan that. Again, it's a learning curve. So I have 2 or 3 dental assistants who are the super doing that. It's also important that when you decide to buy a digital scanner for your office, make sure that the company will support you. We'll have the training. We'll have somebody who will provide, maybe not face to face, but at least by Zoom. And in these days, it's no excuse, or Teams, and make sure that the company will be in your back training your staff, because if you don't provide the training, your staff will be, it will be hell. in the training is not rocket science, but somebody needed to really explain the steps to obtain an impression like this. And then you can transfer that to the lab. The lab will create an acrylic model, and then the lab will fabricate the appliance for you. We can also monitor in grow and development. We can look at the arc width, symmetry, overjet, overbite, and then we can, because we it's easy to storage, we can have serial scans for comparisons over time, and we can show to the parents how, thank you to that space maintainer, we maintain the space necessary for the eruption of the future permanent tooth. Also, I don't do this, but I know a good friend of mine, he's a pediatric dentist not too far from here. And I mean, he has been a heavy user of, he probably will be a million times better than me doing this webinar because he has been using digital, he's a pediatric dentist and he has been using digital dentistry for the last 12 years. And he actually uses the technology also to fabricate milling on-site crowns for patients with molar hypomineralization syndrome, for example. So you can design zirconium crowns if you can connect your scanner with a CAD/CAM system. And this is a scanner for a patient with molar incisor hypomineralization. And then you can mill the crown next to you, chair side. And then I don't do that. I don't have the machine to do that. But I guess, in pediatric, that probably, well, I'm a late adopter. But, this has been around for a long time. So I need to think about I don't see too many patients. That's probably my justification. Too many patients with molar hypermineralization syndrome that will justify to have one of these investments. Also for traumatized teeth documentation, pre and post trauma scans, insurance, legal documentation, and planning of splints and restorations. It's a full integration with the CAD/CAM systems. It's a seamless appliance design, faster delivery of retainers and crowns. And then I know I don't do this with the digital scanner, but I know some of my colleagues, they use the scanners for digital smile designs for teenagers. So what is the ideal scanner? And we are getting to the last part of this webinar. I hope that you enjoyed the webinar, but the last 7 minutes, and we are going to have a few minutes for questions, but I want to just tell you the scanner that I'm using because I think so the scanner that I'm using meets all the requirements. It's small, it's wireless, it's light, it's a company who back up and that's DigiDoc, the company who is sponsored this webinar. So I have only good things to say. Scanners in pediatric dentistry. So the ideal scanner, and that's the one that I'm using, the Sensa scanner, is thinner, is lighter, is integrated with a battery, it's smooth, it's fast scanning, which in my opinion, that's super critical in pediatric dentistry to obtain quick scans. The company, no fees, no calibration. You will have 10 terabytes of space in the cloud. Again, the cloud is encrypted. You have a 3-year warranty, and I have an excellent. I don't have the only thing that I have good things to say about Digital Doc. I have been working with Digital Doc even before they start to provide these scanners because Digital Doc also they have a branch of the business into intraoral cameras, and they also have a branch of the business into portable handheld devices, X-ray to go. I don't know how many of you if but I remember a couple of years ago, I have a webinar about handheld X-ray devices, and I talk about all the Nomad and all the different handheld X-ray devices who are available in market. Here in Indiana, we did one of the research um, projects with the X-ray to go to look at the scattered radiation produced by X-ray to go, which is also from Digital Doc. This company is 25 years US-based family-owned business, and they treat you as a family, seriously. I have the other day, my X-ray to go went into the floor, broke down. I called my friend from Digital Dog, Brett, and I said, Brett, I have a problem. And next day he shipped one FedEx camera, a loaner, so I can continue. It's not going to stop the flow of my office. So this is the Ali Star Sensa. It's wireless. And I think so the performance is excellent. It's very compact, it's ergonomic, it's wireless, so you don't have a cable. Not because I hate cables, but you know, I don't have a problem having the cable, but not having the cable is even better. Is something that is really good is a long range, so up to 10 meters. Is pretty smooth, and the data transmission between the scanner and the computer works pretty good. You have about 3 hours of continuous scanning battery, which is great. And also there is a super speedy charger, which take about only 3 minutes before it's charged again. You can do something here. This is one of the brochures of Ali Star of Sensa. You can, with your cell phone, you can go and scan the image that you see there, and then you can see this. This is the oral health report, which is powered by artificial intelligence. And I know the be careful because the password is sensitive, is capital letter sensitive, so it's 6B T capital B lowercase, and then you can scan that and you can see how this technology integrates with this oral health report. And I love, this is the brochure that they have. They have the critic, which is kids, and they have the number one critic choice in pediatric scanners. So the Sensa wireless intraoral scanner is a quantum leap in comfort, size, and speed for pediatric dentistry, with a very nice design, all-day battery life, 3-year warranty, and in my opinion, this is working amazing in my office. So the clinical outcomes of using the digital scanners: shorter treatment times, better, no question, 100% better appliance fit, except, I sometimes in my office, before using the digital scanner, I used to sometimes, not always, but I used to use compound to take the impressions. It looks like a big hard cookie, and you put it in hot water and get a little bit soft, you put that in the tray. It was excellent as well. But the pain of doing that impressions with the compound, burning the patient, it was horrible. Excellent quality impressions, but the pain of using the compound was something that when you put the balance, you'll say, oh my God, I don't want to do that. But the feed using the digital scanners is awesome. It really high patient satisfaction and improved cooperation of future visits. This is just one slide that I put. Why scanning now is a must? Well, the traditional is the alginate or the material impression. Comfort is low, is longer time, the accuracy is variable, and the retakes often needed, depending of again the expertise of your dental assistants. With digital, high comfort, faster time, high accuracy, and then you can re-scan the areas that they don't look very good. Now, what is the investment? There is a range depending of the one that you want to buy. Is something in between 15K to 30K. You know, I think so. We in pediatric dentistry, that's my opinion. We need really going with the technology that is the smaller, the technology that is going to scan the faster, and that probably will be my two reasons to decide which one I'm going to buy. Um, the Sensa is one of the options, but obviously it's not the only option. There are other options in the market that they also will meet that requirement. I need something that is wireless. I need something that will allow to take a quick scan, and it will allow me to use a small head. Also, I need to look at the software and licenses fees because some of the scanners they require an extra payment for the software. And then I need to look at my return of investment through improved workflow, and definitely I can save money. And maybe you need to look at this is a true investment, and and also will improve the communication with the parents, and then that will translate that the parents will bring more parents to your office. Learning curve and training. This is super critical. This is also one of the issues that you need to look when you are ready to move and buy a scanner. Is definitely you need to train your staff, and how the company that you are going to buy is going to offer that training is super critical. There is a learning curve. I don't think it's super bad, but definitely there is a learning curve. Look at the manufacturer support. DigiDoc, they provide all the support that you can imagine. It is sometimes, annoying. They really will provide the support that you needed. And in the way that the technology update, you need to just make sure that you will be able to update the software and your scanner. Limitations, we are just getting to the last couple of slides. Limitations: movement during the scanning, difficult posterior scanning in small mouths, definitely, and the moist. So that means that The saliva definitely is not going to be your best friend. Saliva is going to interfere with the quality of your scanner, and that's something that you need to try to avoid as much as you can. It's not ideal for all the procedures. I don't care about the deep subgingival margin. It's still challenging. I don't use the scanner to do full crown, so that's something that is not super critical for me. But definitely, in very young, as you expected, I mean, a super young patient or uncooperative patient, I mean, it doesn't really matter if it's a digital scanner. The patient will continue to be an uncooperative patient. Well, with this, I really want to thank you everyone for attending this webinar. I really appreciate the time and that you took to attend this webinar. My email is there. I really want to thank you, Digital Doc and Lee Star for allowing me to use the slides. And if you have any question, you can put it in the QE, and I will be more than happy in the few minutes that we have to answer the question. Dr. Rubin, thank you so much. You are so nice. Appreciate that for that. I'm sure there is not too many questions because this is a easy. I mean, in terms of understanding, is not. Just stay tuned for our second webinar, who is coming. Do you typically place separator before delivering spacers? Yes, I do that. How long it takes to scan a full mouth and a bite? Well, it depends on the patient and depending on the age of the patient, but can go from 4 or 5 minutes to 8 to 10 minutes. How many times? That's a good question, Shannon. I love it. Love it, love it, love it. How many times a day will you use a scanner? That's why I was a late adopter. You hit exactly because I was thinking, I don't take impressions a lot. Why I'm going to invest 20K, 15K? But Shannon, I loved your question because that was personally more than you can imagine. My practice obviously is in pediatric dentistry. And Shannon, I take when you realize how many patients now you obviously you need to offer the space maintainers to the patient. You need to do that. You need to offer that, and you need to look for that. But I use quite often. I have 4 or 5 patients per day that we use a scanner. So that's a good question. Excellent. Can this be used for implant placement? I don't place implants. I'm a pediatric dentist, so I will just I the answer is yes, but obviously I don't have experience with that. Okay. I will say goodbye, and I really want to thank you and thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for attending this webinar. As always, I hope to see you soon again and have an amazing night. Thank you so much and have a good night. Thank you.